Yes, we're live from the Nasrec Expo Center for its day 5. We're joined by the ANC's spokesperson, Mr. Zizi. Mr. Kodwa, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you.
It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
Mr. Kodwa, just in starting off, there's this dichotomy that between perhaps radical economic transformation and inclusive growth, because we sit through business breakfasts and we hear of inclusive growth. And then outside of commissions, we have perhaps people within the ANC coming individually and they speak of radical economic transformation, which can create some sort of anxiety among South Africans as they continue to watch the policy conference. What is your position in that? Is there this dichotomy or not?
When we met in Mangaung about 5 years ago, we did a stock of our work we have achieved and attained since the attainment of political freedom, and the emphasis political freedom. Our view was that 23 years into democracy, we have now consolidated institutions of democracy, and therefore we've been able to deal with institutionalized racism. But political freedom without economic freedom is meaningless. That's why in Mangaung, when we gathered in 2012, we said one of the overarching program for the second phase of our revolution is radical economic transformation. It's important that we must change the structure, the ownership, the management, the control, the system of our economy. Because 23 years on, it is unexplainable to the ANC as a liberation movement representing the people that the economy is still owned 70% by minority white male in the main. All different sectors who form a backbone of our economy. When you talk about ownership, you're talking about the big four. If you talk about the media, you're talking about the big four. If you're talking about mining and minerals, you're talking about the big four. It cannot be in the context where we want to talk about making sure that there's new players in all these industries, black industries programs, for example, talk to those issues. So there has been a number of interpretations from our own comrades, and then we said we'll use the opportunity of this policy conference to clarify ourselves, because radical economic transformation is a program of the ANC. What that means in relation practically to different sectors of the economy, this policy conference shall clarify that.
Mr. Kodwa, you mentioned that radical economic transformation is the policy of the ANC, but there's questions around how we go about achieving this and how we ensure that those affected by the triple challenges are helped with radical economic transformation. Do we go about achieving this in a way of cooperation, or do we make critical decisions in implementation of such?
The ANC is faced, 23 years into democracy, is faced with two choices. Is to accept the inequality in a manner in which they exist. And the ANC must remain a manager of economic inequalities between the rich and poor.
Yes.
Or the ANC must take decisive and radical decisions in the interest of the poor and the working class. So those decisions must not be, among others, be reckless, though. It has got to be, for example, when we say we must change different sectors of the economy, we must make sure that we grow the economy in a manner that makes those sectors to be competitive. At the same time, we grow the economy so that we can create jobs. That's why as the African National Congress, we must be unapologetic about forging ahead with radical economic transformation, but we must do so in a manner that does not undermine economic growth.
Now, unity is rather the central theme at this point. Theme, yes, apologies, English. Now, with unity being the central theme, we hear that the president is perhaps looking to prepare some sort of formula where both these candidates, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma and Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, could perhaps appear on the same slate. Is there such a report that you've heard of?
Although there was not necessarily a discussion about, or an item called election of leadership at this conference, because that matter does not belong in the policy conference. Of course, when we came here, there were a number of pronouncements that were made about leadership preferences. Among others, the president has been calling for, including Friday, is unity of the African National Congress. Unity is a bedrock of the African National Congress. Organizational unity is important. We can't talk about radical economic transformation on one hand, at the same time we're talking about weak ANC. That's why we spent 2 days to discuss the state of the ANC. We're quite comfortable that as we committed ourselves as we're preparing to come here, that the ANC emerging tomorrow out of Nasrec, rising tomorrow at delegates preparing to go back home, the ANC will be strong like a rose that grew from the concrete. And we're committed to that. And I think the president call is quite the president that we have always known him for, that he understands that, among others, you can't talk about uniting society without uniting the ANC first. So we can't do or die because of preferences of leadership. Whoever leads the ANC, whoever must lead the country, that person must rally behind that person, but that person must lead a united ANC. No leader will emerge in December and lead a divided ANC and hope and expect to win the country election in 2019. You need whoever emerges in December must unite the African National Congress first and foremost.
Mr. Kodwa, let's chat a little bit about the issue of land and how the ANC is going to go about the expropriation of land with or without compensation. The likes of the ANC Youth League stating that they would like the expropriation of land without compensation, but the ANC stating that they want to do it in the confines of the Constitution, in the confines of the law. What's been the discussion?
One of the things that the ANC must not fail, learning from the revolutions of other former liberation movements, we must not fail to implement the agenda of the revolution. Land disposition was, among others, the reason why the African National Congress was formed, in response to conquer and land disposition. The ANC cannot fail to give land back to the people, because it's a historical mission of the ANC upon which it was formed. But that, in the context of constitutional democracy, it can be done in a manner that is adventurous, in a manner that is populist, because it does undermine the very same constitution and the constitutional democracy we seek to build. It must be done. Our constitution, by the way, it does create a possibility that within the constitutional framework, you can return the land equitably. But our government has not even tested the constitutionality of that clause to any court, maybe in a concord. And we think that we can no longer negotiate land restitution and land distribution. We've got to implement it and frustrate it, because we've tried many interventions, whether willing buyer, willing seller. It's very slow pace. Our people are becoming impatient. We don't want a situation that the ANC must adopt a Zimbabwe situation. We must be adventurous and populist, because the movement would have reached a point of decline or a plateau. We think we must act now and implement the agenda of the revolution.
Now, in terms of political education, yesterday we heard Minister Nathi Mthethwa talk about the need for political education. What exactly has prompted that call? We understand it's been there for long, but at this point, what have you observed within perhaps the younger breed of ANC members that has prompted the need for that political incubation of some sort?
There is nothing as dangerous like a member of the ANC who does not know the ANC. There is nothing as dangerous to the ANC like a leader of the ANC who does not know the ANC. Very dangerous to himself, to herself, but very dangerous to the party as well. Because you may lead even the country without knowing the organization you lead. So it's important, among others, theoretically and practically, a member of the ANC, including the leader of the ANC, must understand what is the African National Congress. The ANC, in simple terms, is an organization, is a property of the people of South Africa. It's not an organization of members of the ANC. If you understand that principle, you won't make a mistake and die in support for individuals. Because even as we gather here, we're not for ourselves. We are here on behalf of people of South Africa.
You are here on behalf of the people of South Africa, and something else that I want to touch on is the implementation of the mining charter. We saw some resistance in regards to that from the Chamber of Mines. Just your reaction, how the ANC is going to be moving forward in that regard.
We embrace generally the principles around transformation of mining and mineral sector, in particular, as one of the historical backbone of our economy. And as we do so, we must be unapologetic about radical economic transformation of all sectors, including mining. But we must continue to make sure that it's not just about the ANC embracing. There are different social partners within the industry, and they themselves must participate, even if we don't agree. But an appreciation of engagement is important. Today in South Africa, we're talking about the national minimum wage. It took time, but out of engagement, we ultimately agreed on a minimum program. So we don't think there must be any disengagement. Even if the Chamber of Mines are not happy, let's engage them. Let's engage the union, let's engage the communities who stand to benefit, so that no person on the basis of proposals that are made in the mining charter, it must not repel the social partners. So our view is that we'll encourage both the minister and our government in particular to continue engaging all the social partners within the sector.
But just your response then to the Chamber of Mines stating that they weren't engaged correctly. You are saying that engagement needs to take place. Where did we miss the ball then in that conversation?
No, engagement is a function of ongoing function. So sometimes you can meet with people on one event and then conclude that perhaps you have consulted. And I think we've got to nudge one another. I think we must be patient with one another, because for South Africa to be where we are today, we've nudged, even spend a lot of time with our enemy to be where we are. for the sake of the people of South Africa and advancing our democracy and the strategic objective of creating a non-racial and democratic South Africa. And we've got to be patient with one another. There could be reasons why people don't want to support, and they could making all allegations of being not consulted. Precisely the fact that others, over a period of time, have been beneficiaries of inequality. The ANC must be on the side of the people. My ANC must always be on the side of the poor. But in doing so, the ANC must not be reckless. In order to make a leapfrog, the ANC must carry along with everyone.
Mm-hmm. Now, on the phrase white monopoly capital, we understand that earlier today, certain groupings barged into the Economic Transformation Commissions and were demanding that they pronounce on monopoly capital, in fact, being white. Now, with that said, why is the ANC divided on that phrase itself, or the identity or race, whether it's white or not? Because the likes of Fikile Mbalula went on to say it has existed in ANC lexicon since its founding back in 1912. He quoted Pixley Seme as well as Anton Lambert say they have spoken of white monopoly capital being the enemy of the African people. So what exactly is the issue there when we have people having to barge in for the ANC to pronounce it as white monopoly capital?
No, sometimes I think precisely the reason of the question you asked earlier, the role of political education. Because if you read the strategies and tactics of Morogoro, does clarify the posture and the position of the African National Congress. Firstly, the ANC has never been an anti-white organization, but the ANC has always been against white domination. At the same time, the ANC has never been in a struggle for revenge against injustices, but has always been in a struggle to build a new nation. And it's important to appreciate that. That's why President Mandela, even at the last moment before he was incarcerated, he spoke about his commitment to fight against white domination as well as black domination. When we met in Polokwane, that discussion took about a day or so. But our view was that we can't put an emphasis on white monopoly as though we are promoting black monopoly. And therefore we said any monopoly, that's why there's an emphasis on monopolies, that we were against any monopoly. So the lexicon of the African National Congress cannot be ignored because of the fact that people will say in 2017, we have never had white monopoly. The inequality we have today has got all the contradictions of the NTR, which the NTR must resolve: class, race, and gender. Those issues have got something to do with the race in South Africa, precisely because certain individual sections of our community, because of their color, they were beneficiaries of the policies of the past. That we can't deny.
But you're attributing this now to lack of political education. But what happens if these are senior members of the ANC that go on to dissociate themselves from white monopoly capital? If it's senior members who are saying this, who seem to be denying your jargon, is it perhaps for political expediency, or what would you attribute that to?
The ANC, every time we meet like this, we must appreciate we're a multi-class organization. So we come sometimes from different backgrounds in terms of our interests and ideologically. That's why in the diagnostic report, part of the issues we raise, which worries us, there's a decline of ideological understanding of where we come from. And that decline could be the manifestation of the issues they're raising, that they've permeated in one way or another, people even denouncing their own policies because there is no ideological clarity of what the ANC stands for. So it's important that we must always emphasize what is called common purpose. What brings us together as the ANC? Even though we're an amubas, we're a church, we're a broad church, at the same time we're multi-class, regardless of our individual interest and the location in society, but we must have a common purpose.
Mr. Kodwa, let's then turn our attentions to issues of corruption within the ANC, issues of state capture. Earlier today, we heard Mr. Blade Nzimande touching on the relationship between certain members of the ANC and the Gupta family, stating that those issues need to be dealt with. But do we need to find ourselves in a situation where that net is being cast wider than just one specific family?
It would be narrow of the ANC to come to the policy conference just to discuss the Gupta family. You may be discussing a symptom of a problem. So when we gather here, because we're formulating a policy of the ANC must be durable for a long term, not just to address a specific issue. If there's a specific allegation, that the ANC must deal with. So the issue for us is, to what an extent is a democratic state and democratic government have been influenced by outside private interest. Whether you're talking about 1994 to date, you may be talking about white family, but you may find that the net is wider than what you think. That's why, among others, we make, let's have a judicial platform, a judicial commission of inquiry, where we could understand the depth of the allegations of state capture, so that we don't only focus and become narrowly, and therefore we may live outside, and many others may escape because we just condition ourselves just to deal with one allegation.
Now, back to inclusive growth, when you talk about white domination, that at least the ANC fought against that, but also has raised concern or cautioned against black domination, perhaps as the reverse of white domination. Do you foresee that ever happening?
It won't happen under the ANC if we ideologically and politically were clear, advancing the strategic objective. When we say the strategic objective of the NTR is to create a non-racial, it is important to emphasize that, non-racial, democratic, non-sexist, and prosperous. We are now at a level where we're not talking about prosperity. But we can't talk about a prosperous South Africa, and yet there's still huge inequalities. We've got to address those inequalities, but we can't address them if we continue to negotiate. Only a democratic and developmental state, through its policies, must intervene in the interest of the poor and the working class.
Mr. Kodwa, with regards to talks around the top 6 and possibly the expansion of the top 6 into a top 7 or a top 9, having 2 deputy SGs and so forth, has that discussion come to the fore, and what would be the purpose of having multiple positions?
The way I understand the discussion from the commissions are reporting this afternoon, is not so much about addressing and accommodating individuals. It's about the capacity of the ANC. There is discussion that is taking place, although that discussion was not so much in depth here, about whether the size of the NEC as it stands, 86, is it capacitated enough to respond to the needs of our people? Because almost a certain huge percentage of them are serving in cabinet. They don't have time to do the work of the ANC. Therefore, the ANC's ability to interface with the people is limited. So the discussion is about capacity. Shouldn't we therefore talk about expanding officials in that context? Or shouldn't we talk about reducing the NEC in that context? So we're talking about the quality of the National Executive Committee in its totality. It may include reducing the top 6 to top 5, expanding the top 6 to top 9, but the issue is not about names, it's about capacity.
Are there any challenges being experienced in that regard? Yesterday or a couple of days ago, had the opportunity to speak to Baleka Mbete, and she spoke of maybe financial issues and payment issues. Are there any further challenges in this regard? What
the African National Congress must confront, it has confronted many liberation movements. When you ascend to power, obviously, naturally, majority of your quality cadre get absorbed by the state. And that sometimes it leaves a very small number of comrades to deal with the day-to-day work of the organization. So what the ANC must consider, since 1994, the capacity of the ANC at Lutuli House, for example, has been reduced to such an extent that you only see majority of cadres coming up before elections. The ANC does not live or survive because there are elections tomorrow. It must be an ongoing interface between the people and the ANC. To what an extent that it affects the ANC, the issues of resources can be discussed. I mean, the ANC is not a poor organization, but the fact that majority of your cadres, given your program in government, you also deploy them, is a matter that this policy conference also you have to clarify.
Now, on the issue of factions, we've heard one ANC member after another talking about the delicate time, or the time that you find yourselves in right now. There are divisions. And then some have gone on to quote that you've been in situations like this. They went on to quote the Morogoro, the Kabwes. But the problem there, or some would argue that the problem there was that this was a liberation movement. You have now gone into government. So when you are in crisis as a governing party, it comes with its own dynamics, perhaps proximity to power, access to resources. So as you try to reconfigure or regroup and discipline certain members, there's now ones that push their own agenda because they now have access to resources. They're just that powerful. So how then do you deal with a crisis within a governing party as opposed to Morogoro, where you were a liberation movement?
One of the lessons we learned from O.R. Tambo, the president who celebrated his centenary this year, in one of the addresses, very seminal address, he says, if you thought the struggle for liberation was a difficult one, wait until you are a governing party, because people will demand it's going to be a most difficult struggle. The second one is Amica Cabral, says the most difficult struggle is the struggle against your own weaknesses. As a governing party, sometimes when you yourselves look at yourselves about your own weaknesses, you can't appreciate them, because it's human nature. When you discuss your own weaknesses, the first thing you do is to defend. You defend that, no, it can't be right, and so on. So what we must appreciate as the African National Congress, the ANC is a living organism. It is influenced by both internal and external factors. And it must respond so that it must adapt to new conditions. The new conditions of 2017 are different from 1969. For the ANC to remain relevant 105 years, it must respond to existing material conditions. Material conditions is unemployment, is poverty, is inequality. All the policies that we develop here, if they are not responding to the triple challenge that I've just mentioned, they will remain irrelevant and meaningless. So the ANC itself will become redundant and meaningless if it does not respond to these issues.
Mr. Kodwa, back to the Radical Transformation Committee that took place. There was some sort of incident that took place there, apparently, where Mr. Hanokom was heckled. Are you aware of the situation? And also, can we read any further into that situation? Can we read that maybe the ANC is losing touch with delegates on the ground?
No. We heard about it last night, and that matter has been reported to the steering committee.
Okay.
Steering committee politically is responsible for the running of this policy conference, like all national gatherings of the ANC. And the matter shall be processed in the context of the rules and guidelines which were read during the plenary of the do's and don'ts.
And then communication going forward. You are a communication expert within the ANC. We'd love to think so. But then going forward, we've heard for the longest time now a number of your members go on to speak out against each other in the media space. It's good for us. We'd love to hear what they think.
Of course.
But I think for the party, it's very divisive. So going forward, have you addressed speaking in one voice and perhaps having structures to say you cannot, as this, not even faction, but as this structure, perhaps you're the Women's League or the ANC Youth League, whichever, that you cannot speak unless we have constructed a position as the ANC and perhaps it will be spoken through you?
One of the things we identify in the diagnostic report is a decline of organizational discipline and political discipline. And what we just mentioned now is a function of factions. Because factions, they undermine unity, they undermine discipline. So even if you say don't do this, the following day they do the opposite. It's a function of factions. But we will not tire because we know it's not a majority of members that are here. The delegates, 4,000 delegates that are here, very disciplined. It's individuals, many of them have gone beyond repairs in terms of being members of factions, not members of the organization. But we will not tire even to talk to them. I can tell you that many of whom I've seen and heard talking to different platforms, I call them every morning that you were off message. And they apologize. The Deputy Secretary, Comrade Jesse Duarte, who has worked diligently to make this logistics of this conference successful, has helped me as well to talk to everybody who has spoke off message. But we think we must do so because we've got a responsibility as leadership. It may not end here. We must continue to do so until everybody toes the line.
On the topic of unity, we heard from Mr. Fikile Mbalula stating that President Jacob Zuma is not going anywhere. The ANC is united behind President Jacob Zuma. This is obviously in anticipation of that motion of no confidence being held in secret ballot or not. But we have gotten reports that certain members of the ANC, when speaking and giving their opinion with regards to the issue of secret ballot, are being attacked or being criticized. Is that being dealt with?
When you say members of parliament, first and foremost, their allegiance is with the party. You actually, in the context of our electoral system, our electoral system is party-based. Nobody across political parties has just gone to parliament because you submitted your CV, you were interviewed. No. All of them, whether it's EFF, it's DA, they represent a party first and foremost. That's why any party can just discipline them because they represent a party. So what they expect from the ANC is what they are not expecting from their own members of parliament. But we are confident as the ANC that members of parliament in the ANC, they are not like free agents. They understand first and foremost, the agenda is not to remove President Zuma. The agenda is to dislodge the entire movement, to dislodge the African National Congress. So nobody, for whatever reason, will win when you convince the ANC that it must remove its own president. The ANC is not going to remove its own president in parliament.
Is there no concern, though, of backlash from ordinary South Africans that here, this is in contrast to what the Constitutional Court Chief Justice Mogoeng said about the role of a member of parliament, that the South Africans come first, or the country comes first, and not the political party? So is there concern there of some sort of backlash from ordinary citizens?
The removing of the president of the ANC is not about country first. It's a political agenda. It's a political agenda to dislodge the African National Congress from power.
Talking about President Jacob Zuma, on the opening of the ANC National Policy Conference, he spoke out with regards to the stalwarts and the veterans not taking their seat at the table. Certain members of the ANC came forward then and said that maybe that wasn't the best way to address the situation, as the ANC would like to continue talks with the veterans and the stalwarts. Just your view and reaction.
What the president did not say, and I hear this sometimes get exaggerated and misinterpreted, the president was not questioning the impeccable political credentials of our veterans and stalwarts. We don't question their contribution to our liberation. Many of whom, people like me, they are my leaders, and they remain leaders. That's why we don't refer to them as former leaders, because leadership is not in position. What the president was doing is exactly what the Secretary General did, was to explain the sequence of events that led to, if you like, them boycotting this meeting. It was necessary for the president to do so, given the fact that there was a lot of talk leading up to this meeting, that they boycotted because the top six was arrogant, we did not allow or we did not accede to their demand. It was important for the president to do so, but the president was not questioning their political credentials and the fact that they have selflessly contributed to the liberation of this country.
I just want to take you back to the Derek Hanekom matter. Is the steering committee perhaps looking to deal decisively with this issue, or it's something that can easily be swept under the carpet?
We've got committees. The National Conference of the ANC, including the Policy Conference, is run according to committees. We've got a disciplinary committee, we've got a media committee, we've got the overall committee that runs the smooth running of the conference, steering committee chaired by the Secretary General, with a lot of other people, including the secretaries from provinces. There is no matter that can be put under the carpet. Just to go to the plenary first, must be reported to the plenary that there was an incident, including those who spoke off message, off 10. When we're listening to them, they will be reported to the plenary. Because we want to mention those things, not to punish any individual, but at the end of the day, we want to teach others that it's not done. When there is a clear instruction from the national leadership that don't do this, you do the opposite.
Mr. Kodwa, back to the issue of white monopoly capital. There's been a lot of debate around this term and how it should be phrased. Should it be just plainly put as monopoly capital? Should there necessarily be a race attached to it? What is the ANC's view here?
Our view is that currently, the inequality in South Africa, we have not resolved the interrelated contradictions in terms which must be resolved by the National Democratic Revolution. The interrelated contradictions is race, gender, and class. When you're talking about unemployment in South Africa, the ever-increasing unemployment, it has got all the interrelated contradictions of race. It's not like all races, in terms of percentage, are equal when it comes to unemployment. Majority is black and female, and there's a history to that. Whether you're talking about inequality and poverty, you can't talk about in general terms, unless we resolve these issues. So when we talk about, in terms of white monopoly, we must not deny the fact of the inequalities today in terms of resolving the interrelated contradictions. We'll be failing the National Democratic Revolution if we don't speak about it. But it must, the NTR, it gives us what we aspire to be in the future. We don't aspire for a black monopoly capital.
Okay.
We also fight against it. We must create an equal society. If we're talking about prosperity, it can't be based on replacing white domination with black domination.
Now, for us as the media, we assess or scrutinize each and everything. With the delegates here, we listen to the songs that are being sung because we're still trying to find out what we should expect come December for the elective conference. Now, we also check for body language, how certain delegates are reacting to other delegates. Now, with what we've seen here, yesterday there was also a story that broke of some delegates having said that those that are anti-Zuma must either stay on the bus and be pro-Zuma or get off the bus. Now, with that said, if you can confirm that that incident did in fact happen, would that not be an indication of what is to come the elective conference? No, we are still confident that remaining day or 2.5 days to go, even those who came here with perception and attitudes for whatever reasons, the ability of coming under one roof as the ANC, out of a challenge as the ANC, we see an opportunity. And I can tell you that attitude, even some delegates came up with here, it has already died down. There's an appreciation that unity is a rock upon which the ANC was founded. And we understand that whatever preferences we have of leadership,
No one leader of the ANC or slate that may win this coming December will win the ANC election in 2019. So it's important that there must be consensus, must talk to one another for the sake of the ANC, not because of individuals.
Mr. Kodwa, let's chat a little bit about the youth of South Africa and issues that are affecting the youth of South Africa. One of the issues that we saw come to the fore over the last couple of months was the issue of education. We saw protests tagged #fees must fall. Students are saying they are tired of the government not doing anything. They are tired of having to go so far and to protest and to start some sort of violence before the government can tend to their issues. Where is the ANC with regards to the issue of education?
What we must appreciate among young people is the levels of enthusiasm and participation.
Definitely.
And sometimes we do try to create a narrative that young people are apathetic. They are politically apathetic, they are not active. Through these actions we're talking about, fees must fall, roads must fall, decolonizing the mind and decolonizing education, it's part of youth activism in 2017. Because you shouldn't expect them to do exactly the same things of 1976, of 1985. They are taking up issues not because they want to benefit as individuals, but for generations to come. That's why, among others, we must not fail the aspirations of the Freedom Charter in terms of what Freedom Charter directs us to do. Free and basic education, to open the doors of learning. We have successfully opened the doors of learning, but the issue that students sometimes they complain about is quality of that education. So that's why we can't fail the aspiration to decolonize the mind and to decolonize education.
Now you talk of being in the second phase of transition, which is economic transformation. This, we take it for all of you, is a protected space where you can differ on a number of issues. Today with the Business Breakfast, Stephen Kosef was talking about, or at least he spoke out against the public protector, and the mandate of the Reserve Bank also spoke out against the mining charter. Now, with that said, if you're looking for the inclusive growth, is this in that protected space not a time where they should also mention, as the business sector mentioned, some of the concerns raised by the Competition Commission? To say here we're speaking openly even about our issues as the business sector, but there was no mention of the cartels. There was no mention of the oligopolistic practices in the South African corporate arena. So what happens there if you guys are not having open cards, where you're looking to speak to big business? As political parties, you are conceding there is corruption, everything that you've spoken out against, and then here they are, but it doesn't seem they're meeting you halfway and conceding to some of the issues that are in their arena. So will you guys ever find each other?
There was corruption happening in the private sector, and sometimes it's not spoken about. It's only in those 1 or 2 instances of big corporates and monopolies where they are found, not because it is reported. The focus deliberately, sometimes the narrative at an ideological level, is that the word corruption has been given a color. What is corruption is black. And that narrative sometimes finds resonance with those who own, in particular, the print media, and particularly ignore the fact that worse corruption happened in the private sector. What we have found is that over a period of time, unfortunately, the private sector has not been coming to the party to also contribute to the building of a democratic state, to creating an opportunity for our young people. But we're not tired to talk to them, because we're in a revolution. When you're in a revolution to destroy the old order will resist any change. So whoever will speak at a breakfast meeting, that person represents the old order, because they knew when it wants to destroy the old. Perhaps the old will refuse to give back to the new, but the new must resist and fight with agility to make sure that the new is born.
Mr. Kodwa, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you
For talking to us here on ANC.
I'll be here in the next hour.
You will? We'll wait for you then. Thank you very much. That was Mr. Zizi Kodwa, the ANC spokesperson, joining us here at our Nasrec studio in the south of Johannesburg. It is day 5 of the 5th ANC National Policy Conference. Debate and discussions will continue, but we are going to take a quick break. But do stay with us here at ANN7.